The city lights blurred through the rain-streaked windows of the penthouse suite, casting dancing reflections across Amara's trembling hands. At midnight, 30 floors above the bustling streets of Manhattan, she stood in Xavier Langston's private sanctuary, the diamond wedding ring on her finger catching the golden glow like a beacon of everything that had gone wrong. This wasn't supposed to happen, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm battering the glass walls. But I can't pretend anymore. Xavier emerged from the shadows, his usually commanding presence now vulnerable, desperate. The billionaire CEO who controlled empires with a single phone call stood frozen, watching the woman who had turned his carefully constructed world upside down. Amara, don't what? She spun around, tears mixing with the rain's rhythm against the windows. Don't admit that this fake marriage became real. Don't confess that I fell for a man I was forced to marry. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. 3 months ago, HR had orchestrated this union to save the company's reputation. Tonight, everything they thought they knew about love, power, and choice hung in the balance. But to understand how a brilliant woman ended up in a billionaire's arms, defying everything she believed about love and control, we need to go back to where it all began. Hello, my dear family. I'm in a bind, and I need your help to ensure that I and my family can have food to eat and be able to pay our bills and mortgage. Please, my dear family, kindly subscribe and watch this video to the end. That's how you can support me. Please comment where you are watching this story from. You are all I have, and God will bless you and your family. Thank you. Now let's proceed with the story. 3 months earlier, Amara Sinclair's heels clicked against the marble floors of Langston International's 42nd floor like a metronome counting down to destiny. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had clawed her way from a cramped Brooklyn apartment to the executive boardrooms of Manhattan's elite. At 28, she had already restructured 3 failing divisions and saved the company $40 million with her innovative cost-cutting strategies. Ms. Sinclair, the HR director's voice cracked slightly as Amara entered the conference room. Margaret Chin, usually unflappable, fidgeted with her papers like a student facing a pop quiz. You called an emergency meeting. Amara settled into the leather chair, her sharp business suit reflecting morning sun streaming through the windows. What's the crisis this time? Margaret exchanged glances with the 3 board members seated around the mahogany table. Amara, what I'm about to propose will sound unconventional. Try me. The board has voted unanimously on a solution to our current public relations disaster. Margaret slid a thick document across the table. We need you to marry Xavier Langston. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Amara's laugh came out sharp and incredulous. Excuse me. The shareholders are threatening to pull out after the Johnson Industries scandal, board member Harrison Wells explained, his voice clinical. Stock prices have plummeted 20% this week alone. We need a narrative that shows stability, commitment, and... He paused. Diversity in leadership. Amara's blood turned cold. You want me to be your poster child for corporate damage control? It's a temporary arrangement, Margaret rushed to clarify. 18 months maximum. Full compensation, stock options, and a guaranteed promotion to Vice President of Strategic Operations. And if I refuse? The silence that followed told her everything. Wells cleared his throat. The restructuring begins Monday. Your division is expendable. 20 floors above them, Xavier Langston stood at his office window, unaware that his life was being rewritten in a conference room below. At 35, he had built Langston International from a failing family business into a Fortune 500 empire. The costs had been brutal. 14-hour days, strategic marriages to business partners that crumbled under the weight of ambition, a loneliness that even billions couldn't fill. His assistant knocked gently. Mr. Langston, the board is requesting your immediate presence in Conference Room B. Xavier's jaw tightened. Board meetings without advance notice usually meant one thing: crisis management. He had fired 3 executives this month alone for leaking sensitive information to competitors. Trust had become a luxury he couldn't afford. The conference room fell silent as he entered. Margaretson looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, while the board members wore expressions he couldn't quite read. Gentlemen, Margaret. He took his seat at the head of the table. What requires my immediate attention? We've identified a solution to our current market instability. Wells began carefully. A strategic partnership that will restore investor confidence and demonstrate our commitment to progressive leadership. Xavier's eyes narrowed. What kind of partnership? A marriage, Margaret said quietly, to Amara Sinclair. The pen in Xavier's hand snapped. You're joking. The contracts are already prepared, Wells continued, sliding an identical document toward him. 18 months. Mutual benefit. She gets security and advancement. You get a brilliant partner who understands a business inside and out. You mean a wife who won't ask questions about late nights and closed-door meetings, Xavier said coldly. She's perfect for this, Margaret pressed on. Respected by employees, feared by competitors, and... She hesitated. Photogenic enough for the media campaign we'll need to launch. Xavier stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Below, the city moved in its relentless rhythm, millions of people making choices that mattered to them. When had his life become a series of bored decisions and calculated moves? Where is she now? Conference Room C, reviewing the terms. 2 floors below, Amara read the contract with a methodical precision that had made her legendary in corporate circles. The terms were generous. Suspiciously so. A base salary increase of 60%, stock options worth potentially millions, and a clause that guaranteed her position regardless of the marriage's outcome. But buried in the legal language was something that made her blood run cold. A morality clause that would void everything if she engaged in behavior detrimental to the company's image or the marriage arrangement. This is a cage, she murmured, flipping through pages of restrictions. No dating other people. No public statements about the marriage without approval. No travel without the spouse's knowledge. Margaret reappeared with coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Have you made your decision? What happens if we can't stand each other? You're both professionals. I'm sure you'll manage. Amara looked up from the contract. When do I meet him? He's reviewing his copy now. We've scheduled a introduction for this afternoon. An introduction? Amara's voice dripped with sarcasm. How romantic. This isn't about romance. Amara, this is about survival. The company's and yours. The elevator carried Amara to the executive floor that afternoon, each ascending floor feeling like another step toward a future she'd never chosen. She had built her career on making tough decisions, but this felt different. This felt like surrender. The doors opened to reveal Xavier Langston waiting in the hallway, his expression unreadable. He was taller than she'd expected, with silver threading through his dark hair and eyes that seemed to analyze everything they saw. Ms. Sinclair. His voice was deep, controlled. I assume you read the terms. Every word. She stepped out of the elevator, meeting his gaze directly. Have you? Twice. He gestured toward his office. Shall we discuss how we're going to make this work? Neither of them realized that corporate manipulation would become the catalyst for something neither expected, something that would change everything. Xavier's office felt like a fortress of glass and steel, commanding views of the city that seemed to bow before his empire. Amara took in a minimalist decor. No family photos, no personal touches, just awards and architectural precision that screamed control. Coffee, he offered, moving toward a sleek machine that probably cost more than most people's cars. I don't drink coffee with people who are about to ruin my life. Her words cut through the formal atmosphere like a blade. Xavier paused, his hand hovering over the machine. I didn't choose this either. No, but you have the power to stop it. Amara crossed her arms, her business suit like armor. One word from you, and this entire charade disappears. And watch the company collapse? Watch 3,000 employees lose their jobs because of the scandal I didn't create. He turned to face her fully. You're smarter than that. Amara. The use of her first name felt invasive, too intimate for someone she'd met 5 minutes ago. Don't pretend this is about noble sacrifice. This is about protecting your empire. My empire that you've helped build with your strategies over the past 2 years. His voice remained steady, but she caught something flickering in his eyes. The Jakarta expansion, the Morrison acquisition, that was your brilliance. She hated that he knew her work, that he'd been watching her climb the corporate ladder. Flattery won't make this easier. I'm not trying to flatter you. I'm trying to understand the woman I'm apparently going to marry in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. The timeline hit her like cold water. That's soon. The board wants the announcement Monday. A small ceremony next month. Then a honeymoon in the Swiss Alps that's really a cover for the Brennan Industries merger talks. He spoke like he was reading from a script. We'll maintain separate living spaces, of course. How generous. Sarcasm dripped from every word. Xavier studied her face, searching for something she refused to reveal. What would make this bearable for you? My own office, not some corporate wife's decorator showcase. A real office with real responsibilities. Done. What else? His quick agreement threw her off balance. She'd expected a fight. No public displays of affection. No pretending we're madly in love for the cameras. Professional respect. I can manage that. He moved closer, and she caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something she couldn't identify. Anything else? Yes. Her voice hardened. When this 18-month nightmare ends, I want your guarantee that my career won't suffer for whatever games the board is playing. You have it. In writing. In writing. He extended his hand. Partners. She stared at his outstretched palm, knowing that shaking it would seal her fate. Partners in misery. The next 4 weeks moved like a controlled avalanche. Every day felt like a chess match where neither player knew the rules, but both refused to lose. Board meetings became exercises in diplomatic warfare, with Amara and Xavier maintaining professional facades while executives watched for cracks in their armor. The wedding dress fitting is scheduled for Thursday, Margaret announced during their weekly briefing. The designer is expecting you at 2. Amara didn't look up from her reports. Cancel it. Amara, the media, will photograph me in whatever I choose to wear. I'm not playing dress-up for shareholders. Across the conference table, Xavier's mouth twitched in what might have been approval. She has a point. Since when do we micromanage personal choices? Margaret's face flushed. The board specifically requested. The board can request all they want, Amara interrupted. I'm marrying him, not them. After the meeting, Xavier caught up with her in the hallway. That was unnecessary. Which part? Standing up for myself or saving you from a 2-hour conversation about fabric choices? I meant effective. His eyes held a glint of something she couldn't quite read. You just saved us both from Margaret's design philosophy. Despite herself, Amara almost smiled. Almost. The corporate gossip mill worked overtime, and neither of them was immune to its poison. Whispered conversations stopped when they entered rooms. Colleagues watched their every interaction with the intensity of courtroom spectators. The worst part was pretending not to notice. Did you see how she looked at him in the elevator? $20 says they're already sleeping together. I heard she demanded a prenup worth $50 million. Amara found Xavier on the roof terrace during lunch, staring out at the city below. She'd come here to escape the suffocating attention, not to find him brooding like some romance novel hero. Regretting your decision? She asked, joining him at the railing. Every morning when I wake up. His honesty surprised her. You. Every minute of every day. They stood in comfortable silence, 2 people trapped in the same golden cage. The city noise drifted up from far below. Car horns, construction, the sound of life moving forward while they stood frozen. They're betting on us, you know, Xavier said eventually. I heard. 50-50 odds we'll be divorced before the first anniversary. Smart money's on 6 months. Amara turned to study his profile. What do you think? I think we're both too stubborn to give them the satisfaction. He looked at her then, really looked, and for a moment the corporate mask slipped. I think we might surprise everyone. Including ourselves? Especially ourselves. The wedding preparations consumed their days like a carefully managed crisis. Venue selections, guest lists, menu tastings. Each decision felt like another brick in a wall they were building around their lives. Xavier proved surprisingly accommodating, deferring to her choices on everything from flowers to music. "You're being too agreeable," she accused him during a particularly frustrating cake tasting. "It's making me nervous. Would you prefer I fight you on buttercream versus fondant? I'd prefer honesty over politeness." He set down his fork and fixed her with a stare that made her stomach flutter uncomfortably. "Honestly, I think you have excellent taste. I think you're brilliant and terrifying, and probably the only person in this building who could survive being married to me. And I think this whole situation is completely insane, but if we're going to do it, we might as well do it right." The intensity in his voice caught her off guard. For weeks, they'd maintained careful professional distance, but something in his tone suggested deeper currents running beneath the surface. "Xavier, the industry gala is tomorrow night," he said, shifting back to safer ground. "First public appearance as an engaged couple. You ready for the spotlight?" She wasn't ready for anything about the situation, least of all the way her heart had started racing whenever he looked at her like that. But she nodded anyway, because what choice did she have? Neither of them could have predicted what that single evening would unleash. Then came the night of the industry gala, a night that would shatter every wall they built between them. The Meridian Tower's penthouse ballroom glittered like a constellation suspended above Manhattan. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the city's elite, their conversations a symphony of business deals and social maneuvering. Amar adjusted the emerald silk dress that Xavier had insisted on buying, his first act as her fiancé that felt genuinely thoughtful rather than obligatory. "You look stunning," he murmured as they stepped from the private elevator, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. The touch sent unexpected electricity through her, a reaction she quickly buried beneath her professional smile. "Remember the story," she replied under her breath. "College sweethearts who reconnected at a business conference." "Right, and I proposed on a beach in Malibu during the Morrison deal." His voice carried just enough warmth to convince any eavesdroppers, but she caught the strain underneath. They moved through the crowd like seasoned performers, accepting congratulations and fielding questions about wedding plans with practiced ease. Xavier introduced her to investors and board members from rival companies, his pride in her accomplishments genuine despite the circumstances of their arrangement. "Miss Sinclair's cost reduction strategy saved us $40 million last quarter," he told Harrison Industries CEO, his hand finding hers as naturally as breathing. "I'm lucky she agreed to take on the biggest project of all, reforming me." The crowd laughed on cue, but Amar noticed how Xavier's smile never quite reached his eyes. For all his success, he moved through these gatherings like a man underwater, performing a role that had long since lost its meaning. 2 hours into the evening, she found herself watching him from across the room as he discussed quarterly projections with a group of board members. He looked tired, not physically, but soul deep weary in a way that expensive suits and corporate victories couldn't mask. "Champagne!" A server appeared at her elbow with a crystal flute. "Thank you." She took the glass, using the moment to scan the room. The same faces, the same conversations, the same careful dance of power and politics that had consumed her life for years. When had it all started feeling so hollow? "You look like you're planning an escape." Xavier's voice came from directly behind her, close enough that she felt his breath against her neck. She turned, finding him closer than propriety suggested, his eyes darker than she'd ever seen them. Just thinking. Dangerous habit at these things. He gestured toward a quieter alcove near the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Care to share?" They moved away from the crowd, the noise fading to a distant hum. The city spread out below them, millions of lights creating their own galaxy of possibility. Up here, the corporate game felt distant, almost irrelevant. Can I ask you something? Amara set her champagne on a nearby table, meeting his gaze directly. Anything. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd met differently, under normal circumstances? Xavier's expression shifted, the careful control slipping for just a moment. Every day. The honesty in his voice hit her like a physical blow. She'd expected deflection, humor, anything but the raw truth that now hung between them. I look at you in those board meetings, he continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, and I see someone who challenges every assumption I've made about business, about life. And I hate that our first conversation was about a contract instead of what? Instead of the fact that you're the most remarkable woman I've ever met, and I have no idea how to separate the arrangement from what I'm starting to feel. The words hung in the space between them like a confession neither had meant to make. Amara felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack, years of independence and self-protection warring with something she didn't want to name. Xavier, she started, but he shook his head. I know, this complicates everything. He moved closer, his hand rising to cup her face with devastating gentleness. But I can't pretend anymore that this is just business. In that moment, the CEO and the brilliant strategist ceased to exist. They were just two people who'd found something unexpected in the worst possible circumstances, fighting against rules they'd never agreed to follow. We shouldn't, she whispered, even as she leaned into his touch. No, we shouldn't. His thumb traced across her cheekbone, and she felt herself drowning in the intensity of his gaze. But I'm tired of should and shouldn't. Aren't you? Instead of answering, she rose on her toes and kissed him. The kiss was nothing like the polite pecks they'd shared for cameras. This was fire and desperation, months of denied attraction finally given permission to surface. His hands tangled in her hair, destroying the careful styling, while hers gripped the lapels of his jacket like anchors in a storm. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, the gala seemed to exist in another universe entirely. Your place or mine? The question escaped before she could stop it, bold and breathless, and completely unlike the careful woman she'd been an hour ago. Mine's closer. His voice was rough with want, and she realized with startling clarity that she'd never heard him sound less composed. The elevator ride to his penthouse felt endless and instantaneous all at once. They stood on opposite sides of the small space, the air between them charged with electricity that made small talk impossible. When the doors opened, revealing the sleek lines of his private residence, Amara felt like she was crossing a threshold that would change everything. Are you sure? Xavier asked, his hand still on the elevator controls. Because once we do this, there's no going back to purely professional. I stopped being sure about anything the moment you walked into my life, she admitted. But I'm tired of fighting what I want. His apartment was a study in controlled luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture, everything designed for a man who lived alone by choice. But as he led her through the space, she noticed small details that revealed more personality than his office ever had. Books stacked on side tables, a guitar leaning against the wall, photographs of places rather than people. They stopped in front of the windows overlooking the city, the lights below creating a backdrop of stars. The storm that had been threatening all evening finally broke, rain streaming down the glass in rivers that caught and refracted the glow from outside. I've been thinking about this since that first day in my office, Xavier said, turning to face her. About what it would be like to touch you without contracts and witnesses and corporate approval. And her voice came out breathier than intended, and I realized I don't care about the consequences anymore. He kissed her again, slower this time but no less intense. His hands explored the silk of her dress, tracing the curves he'd only been able to admire from a distance. She responded by working the buttons of his shirt, her fingers trembling slightly as she revealed the warm skin beneath. When he lifted her onto the marble kitchen counter, the cool surface against her thighs made her gasp into his mouth. He stepped between her knees, his hand spanning her waist, and she felt like she was drowning in sensation. The heat of his skin, the scent of his cologne mixed with rain from the storm outside, the way he whispered her name like a prayer. "Tell me what you want," he murmured against her throat, his lips finding the sensitive spot just below her ear. "You," she breathed. "Just you." What happened next was a symphony of whispered endearments and gentle exploration. Two people who've been forced together by circumstance, choosing each other in the most fundamental way possible. He worshipped her with a reverence that made her feel beautiful rather than merely desired, while she offered herself with a trust that surprised them both. Later, wrapped in his sheets with the storm still raging outside, they lay in comfortable silence. Xavier's fingers traced patterns on her bare shoulder, and Amara marveled at how natural this felt despite the chaos it would create in their carefully ordered lives. "What are we going to tell the board?" she asked eventually. "The truth," he said simply, "that sometimes the best business decisions are the ones you make with your heart." She turned to look at him, finding his expression serious despite the intimacy of their position. "And if they don't approve, then we'll deal with the consequences." Together, the word hung between them like a promise, heavy with implications neither was ready to fully examine. But as dawn broke over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Amara realized that somewhere between the corporate manipulation and the carefully negotiated terms, she'd found something she'd never expected to discover. She'd found a partner who saw her not as a strategic asset or a beautiful accessory, but as an equal worthy of respect and genuine affection. But one night of passion was just the beginning of a transformation that would rock the very foundations of Langston International. Monday morning arrived with the relentless efficiency of corporate life, but everything felt different as Amara stepped from the elevator onto the executive floor. Xavier's scent still lingered on her skin despite the thorough shower, and she caught herself touching her lips where he'd kissed her goodbye just an hour earlier. "Good morning, Miss Sinclair." Margaret Chen's voice carried a note of curiosity as she fell into step beside her. "You're glowing this morning." "Am I?" Amara kept her expression neutral, but her pulse quickened. Must be the new moisturizer. The boardroom buzzed with its usual pre-meeting energy, but Amara felt hyper-aware of every detail. The way Xavier's fingers drummed against his coffee cup, the slight smile that tugged at his mouth when her eyes met across the mahogany table, the electricity that seemed to crackle between them despite the dozen other executives present. "The Morrison Industries merger is proceeding ahead of schedule," Xavier announced, his voice carrying the same authority it always had. But when he glanced at Amara during his presentation, she caught something new in his expression, a warmth that made her stomach flutter with remembered intimacy. Every stolen glance in board meetings carried a secret message now. The way he handed her documents, their fingers brushing for just a moment longer than necessary. The protective note in his voice when Harrison Wells questioned one of her strategies. The almost imperceptible way his body angled toward hers whenever they stood in the same room. "Have you noticed anything different about the happy couple?" she overheard Jessica from accounting whisper to her colleague during lunch. "They actually seem happy." The observation hit closer to home than Amara cared to admit. She was happy, in a way that terrified her. Not the satisfaction of closing a successful deal or receiving recognition for her work, but something deeper, the contentment of being truly seen by another person. Xavier appeared at her office door that afternoon, his jacket slung over his shoulder and his tie loosened in a way that reminded her of how she'd undressed him just 2 nights ago. "Working late?" he asked, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "The quarterly projections won't analyze themselves." She gestured to the spreadsheets covering her desk, but her focus was entirely on the way he moved through her space with newfound familiarity. "They can wait until tomorrow." He rounded her desk, and she found herself turning in her chair to face him. "Have dinner with me." "We already have the fundraiser dinner Thursday." Not a corporate obligation. His hands found her shoulders, thumbs tracing gentle circles that made rational thought difficult. "A real dinner. Just us." "Xavier," she started to protest, but he knelt beside her chair, bringing them to eye level. "I know this complicates everything," he said softly, "but I can't pretend that night didn't happen. Can you?" The honest answer was no. She'd spent 3 days trying to return to their professional dynamic, but every interaction felt charged with unspoken possibilities. The careful distance they'd maintained for weeks had collapsed entirely, replaced by something that felt dangerously real. "My apartment, 7 o'clock. The words escaped before her practical side could intervene. "I'll cook." His smile was worth every risk they were taking. Her Brooklyn apartment couldn't have been more different from his Manhattan penthouse. Warm wood floors, mismatched furniture, bookshelves overflowing with everything from business theory to poetry. Xavier moved through the space with obvious curiosity, pausing to examine family photos and the small garden she cultivated on her fire escape. "This is you," he said, touching a framed picture of her college graduation. "The real you." Disappointed? She joined him in the living room, 2 glasses of wine in hand. Fascinated? He accepted the wine, his fingers lingering on hers. "You hide so much of yourself at the office." "Corporate survival," she said simply. "Show weakness and they'll use it against you." "Even with me?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications. She studied his face, the sharp cheekbones softened by lamplight, the eyes that had seen her at her most vulnerable just days ago. "Especially with you," she admitted. "You have the most power to hurt me." Instead of responding with words, he set their wine glasses aside and pulled her into his arms. This kiss was different from the desperate hunger that first night. Slower, deeper, filled with a tenderness that made her chest ache. "I would never hurt you intentionally," he whispered against her lips. "You have to know that." But the corporate world doesn't forgive those who dare to feel, and they both knew it. Every day brought new challenges to their fragile connection. Board members watching for signs of weakness, competitors looking for leverage, the constant pressure to maintain their professional facades while navigating this new emotional territory. 3 weeks after that first transformative night, they fell into a rhythm that felt both natural and impossible. Days filled with strategic meetings and corporate warfare, evenings stolen away in her apartment or his penthouse, learning each other's histories and hidden dreams. "Tell me something nobody else knows," she murmured one evening, her head pillowed on his chest as rain painted patterns on her bedroom windows. "I wanted to be a teacher," he said quietly. "Before my father died and left the company, I had plans to teach high school history, maybe coach basketball." The image of Xavier with teenage students, patient and encouraging rather than commanding and intimidating, made her smile. "You would have been good at it." "Your turn." She traced circles on his bare chest, gathering courage for the confession she'd never made to anyone. "I write poetry. Terrible, sentimental poetry that would destroy my reputation if anyone ever found it." "Show me." "Absolutely not." He tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his gaze. "I told you my secret. Teaching isn't embarrassing. Bad poetry is a career killer." "Not to me." His voice carried a conviction that made her heart skip. "Nothing about you could embarrass me. Amara, you're remarkable." The sincerity in his words broke through another layer of her defenses. She reached for the notebook she kept hidden in her nightstand, her hands trembling slightly as she read him a piece about finding light in unexpected places. When she finished, he was quiet for so long she began to regret the vulnerable moment. But then he kissed her forehead with reverence that felt like worship. "Beautiful," he whispered, "just like you." As their connection deepened, a new challenge emerged, one that would test whether their love could survive the very system that created it. The challenge came in the form of a leaked recording, 30 seconds of their private conversation from Amar's apartment, somehow captured and delivered to Harrison Wells' desk with surgical precision. Xavier's voice admitting he never intended to fall in love with his arranged wife echoed through the boardroom speakers like a death sentence. "This changes everything," Wells announced at the emergency board meeting. The shareholders invested in a strategic partnership, not some romantic fairy tale that could compromise judgment. Amara sat frozen as the recording played again, her own voice responding to Xavier's confession with words that now felt like weapons. I know this is real, but what if just playing house with corporate money? The contract specified professional boundaries, Margaret added nervously. Actual emotional attachment creates liability issues. Enough. Xavier's voice cut through the room like steel. He stood slowly, his gaze moving from board member to board member with deadly calm. You want to know what creates liability? Forcing two people into a marriage and then punishing them for making it work. Wells leaned forward aggressively. Your personal feelings are irrelevant to... My personal feelings, Xavier interrupted, are the only thing keeping this company profitable. Amara and I have increased productivity by 30% because we actually trust each other, something none of you seem capable of understanding. Amara found her voice. The Morrison deal succeeded because we worked as genuine partners. The Jakarta expansion is ahead of schedule because we complement each other's strengths. You want to dissolve this arrangement? Fine, but you'll lose both of us. The silence that followed felt like the calm before a storm. Wells' face had gone pale, and Margaret looked like she might faint. $40 billion in active deals suddenly hung in the balance. You can't be serious, Wells stammered. Try us. Amara stood beside Xavier, their hands finding each other naturally. We've already proven we're stronger together than apart. The question is whether this company is smart enough to recognize that. 3 months later, the transformation was undeniable. Employee satisfaction had reached record highs, productivity soared, and their stock price had recovered beyond pre-scandal levels. More importantly, other companies began modeling their partnership approach, creating a ripple effect that changed corporate culture industry-wide. The real change, though, was personal, which brought them back to that rainy night in Xavier's penthouse, the city lights painting shadows across Amara's tear-streaked face as she stood in her wedding dress. The one she'd chosen herself, not the board-approved option Margaret had suggested. This wasn't supposed to happen. She whispered, her voice breaking on the words. But these weren't tears of despair. They were tears of overwhelming gratitude for a love she'd never expected to find. But I can't pretend anymore, she continued, turning to face Xavier. I can't pretend this is just convenient or strategic, or anything other than the most real thing in my life. He crossed the room in 3 quick strides, gathering her into his arms as thunder rolled across the sky outside. Then don't pretend. Marry me because you want to, not because a contract says you have to. Yes, she breathed against his lips. Yes to choosing you every day. Yes to building something that belongs to us, not them. The ceremony the next morning was small, just them, an officiant, and the sunrise over Central Park. No board members, no corporate photographers, no strategic advantages. Just 2 people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances, choosing love over convenience. 6 months later, Langston Sinclair International became the most innovative firm in the industry, built on a foundation of genuine partnership and mutual respect. Sometimes the universe conspires in the most unexpected ways, and what starts as the worst thing that could happen becomes the best thing that ever did. Sometimes the universe conspires in the most unexpected ways, and what starts as the worst thing that could happen becomes the best thing that ever did. Have you ever found yourself in a situation that seemed impossible, only to discover it led you exactly where you needed to be? Amara and Xavier's story proves that sometimes our greatest challenges become our greatest blessings. What would you have done in Amara's position? Would you have fought the arrangement or embraced the unexpected possibility of love? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I love hearing your perspectives on these incredible stories. If you believe that love can bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, hit that like button. And if you want more stories about people who defied the odds to find their happy endings, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that sometimes the best things in life come disguised as the worst. Because stories like Amara and Xavier's remind us that courage and authenticity can transform any situation. What unexpected blessing has disguised itself as a challenge in your life? I'll be reading every comment. So don't be shy. Your story might inspire someone else who's facing their own impossible situation. Until next time, remember, your story is still being written, and the best chapters might be the ones you never saw coming.